to them in their own Scottish constituencies. Increasingly, one of the problems that will have to be faced will be the speculation as to the appropriateness of certain ministerial appointments. Now, there can be no doubt, and I would hope to leave the House in no doubt, about the legitimacy of the monarch appointing to her government any member of the House to any post from any part of the United Kingdom to represent any part of the United Kingdom. But it must surely become a difficult position for a member representing a Scottish seat to hold ministerial office, for example, in health, education, or dare I say transport, where they will be responsible for policy areas in England, yet have no say whatsoever in the same areas affecting their own constituents in Scotland.
Now, the honourable gentleman talks about the West Lothian question as if it was something new. It isn't. We in Scotland suffered from the Home Counties question, the Devon question, the Cornwall question, the Norfolk question and the Suffolk question as generations, week after week, generations of MPs from the Tory shires press-ganged into committee service, marched into the division lobbies to vote down the Scots without ever having heard a word of the debate. That's what I mean when I say they haven't lost their cheek. Now, I think it is regrettable, but not really surprising, that honourable members opposite cannot see an opportunity to improve the operation of this House whenever they are confronted with it. They are so blinded by prejudice, they cannot see that the new governance of Scotland, Wales, Ireland and London will allow an opportunity to improve the business of this House. And the Modernisation Committee of the House will shortly be considering a proposal from my right honourable friend, the Leader of the House, to revive and adapt the Standing Committee on Regional Affairs. And that would enable the House to debate the affairs of the English regions along the lines of the Scottish and Welsh Grand Committees.
The Honourable Lady hasn't addressed any of the issues or answered any of the questions. She's put up a whole load of bogus points, including her reference to a regional standing committee for regional affairs in this House. Is she seriously suggesting that that's the equivalent of the Scottish Parliament? Is she aware that the proposal there suggests that there may be only one debate every 2 years on a region's point? And is she aware that there are no votes taken? It's just simply a talking shop, which is why when it was last tried, it was abandoned.
The Select Committee on Regional Affairs is not envisaged as an alternative to the Scottish Parliament, and I am interested if the right honourable gentleman is advocating that there should be an English Parliament. I would be interested to know the view of his front bench on these matters.
Helen Liddell there, asking if William Hague agrees with the idea of having an English Parliament. But that wasn't the end of the debate. Once the front benches had made their speeches, the way was clear for the back benches.
I was very disappointed indeed to hear the Minister who opened for the government in this debate, and indeed the Honourable Member for Caithness, appear to say there was no such thing as England, whereas Scotland and Wales were real countries. I assure them both there is such a thing as England. When devolution was proposed to Scotland and Wales, no one suggested for 1 minute there should be a separate regional body for the Highlands and Islands and another for the Lowlands. No one suggested there should be a separate body for North Wales, a separate body for Mid Wales, a separate body for South Wales, or even for Swansea and Cardiff. But the case was just as strong for separating out Wales into those three component parts as it is for separating England into its regions.
I think the role of Scottish questions inevitably will change in the Chamber and needs to be perhaps much shorter. I don't think anyone on this side of the House has any problem with that. But there will still be a need for a Secretary of State for Scotland, because Scotland will still be part of the Union. This is not separation, this is devolution.
Are we going to have a situation when you have in fact a situation where the Scottish MPs will determine English issues? We simply can't have that for the good of Parliament. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, there's an easy answer. Surely we could have some kind of standing order change whereby it was recognised as the rule until some other thing was found out, that basically Scottish MPs should not interfere in, should not vote in matters relating to England and Wales. This is something which would be easy to administer, something which wouldn't be a major constitutional nightmare, but something we've just got to face up to.
Irene Adams, it would appear that the West Lothian question is now a reality. You can vote on issues that affect England, like education for example, but Theresa can't vote on Scottish matters. Seems a bit odd.
No, I don't think it's odd at all. This is just it's just the start of constitutional change. Now, it had to start somewhere. And the West Lothian question has never been a question for the people of Scotland. They've taken their decision on that. It's now for the people of England to decide how they want their home affairs answered. Do they want them to be answered in the national parliament, as they are at the moment? A national parliament that I've been elected to, and therefore I'm entitled to vote on these issues.
Let me understand this. You can influence policy in education, for example, in your constituency. You can influence policy in education, but Theresa can't influence policy in her own constituency.
Yes, she can. She can in her own constituency. I can't vote on education in my constituency. What I can vote for Scotland is the overall government grant to Scotland. That's what devolution's about. It's about bringing decisions nearer the people, not taking them as far away from the people as
So you can vote on policy in Theresa's constituency,
That's
but
right.
she can't vote...
At this point in time, that is the case.
But she can't vote on her own.
She can vote
I
on
can't
her own.
vote in Scotland.
You can't vote on your own.
Although,
I can't vote
as
on
an
my own.
English taxpayer, I am paying some money to Scotland. I am paying a great deal more to Scotland per capita for education than I get for my own constituents. And as an English Member of Parliament, I'm supposed to put up with that. The constitutional changes which Mr Blair has brought in have only just begun to show cracks. The first one is this dispute over higher education. Scotland might yet adopt a different policy, decide to give free higher education in Scotland, and expect the English taxpayers to go on subsidising that when their own constituents are paying for their higher education. These kind of anomalies are going to grow, and it will really truly cause dissent between the Scots and the English, which never was there from the English point of view.
Is there a solution, Theresa, to this?
Well, the solution is for the Scottish and the Welsh and eventually the Northern Irish members of Parliament to agree not to vote on matters which only concern English constituencies. But of course they're not going to take a self-denying ordinance. It's part of Labour's overall strategy to see that there is a large block of Labour votes coming in from Scotland and Wales to support Labour's policies for England, and we are not going to put up with that in England.
Tomorrow you're actually launching your bill. Do you think William Hague will support or back you on the question of an English Parliament?
Well, it was very interesting in the debate tonight. I taxed Helen Liddle on whether, considering she thinks it's democratic for the Scots to have had a referendum, why her party doesn't think it's democratic for the English to have a referendum on whether they want a parliament. And the front bench spokesman on our side actually reiterated that question because we couldn't get the Labour spokesman to answer it.
Lambert, an English Parliament?
Well, the answer, we support an English Parliament and also regionalisation within England. And the answer to Theresa's question is very simple. At the moment, there doesn't seem to be a groundswell of support for further devolution within England itself. It's almost as if many people in England feel that Westminster is their parliament. But technically, Theresa describes rightly the difference. Wales and Scotland now have their own parliaments, as has Northern Ireland, but England does not. It is a process, so we're midway at the moment, but there's nothing frightening about that.
So you're quite happy to see regional parliaments in England?
Yes, well, in fact that's one Liberal Democrat policy. The issue for us though is that you can't do it all in one go, and it's very unlikely that a referendum would be won in England at the moment for that extra devolution. But for Theresa to apparently take the SNP role of separatism for Scotland simply because she doesn't like the temporary
fairness for England. The Scots have had a referendum, the Welsh have had a referendum, but the English have not been given the opportunity to express their wish for a parliament in which they dealt with certain issues, the same as in Scotland
but you do
and
support
Wales,
the idea because
without the intervention of members from these devolved parts of the United
Very briefly, you are supporting the idea of devolution. We would absolutely back what you're saying. We're just saying that we have to do it at the right time once the debate's been had in England.
I am supporting the right for the English to have a say.
Yeah, but without the intervention of people from Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Although you did intervene and have consistently opposed devolution, Theresa, right from the beginning. Now the fact is that you are going along the same line as the Scottish nationalists. What you want is England for the English. You've done a report in the Glasgow Herald today where you talk about Scottish people representing English constituencies.
Yes, they
now,
do.
Is it ethnic cleansing we're into here?
No.
You just can't seem to get on with anyone. You don't like the Europeans. You don't particularly like the Welsh.
On the contrary, the English are enormously tolerant.
I'm not talking about the English, I'm talking about you, which is something quite different.
There are more Scots sitting for English constituencies
and English people
than
sitting
there
for
are
Scottish.
in Scotland. More Scots represent English constituencies. The Labour Party in Scotland have actually said that they don't want English people sitting as members of Parliament for the Labour Party in the new Parliament.
Well, what I want to ask you, let's talk a second about, I want to just ask Teresa about the Barnett formula. The Scots get a lot of money from English taxes.
Yes.
Would you change that?
Well, I think inevitably it will have to change. It won't change under Labour because they want to go on subsidising a strong Labour vote in Scotland. But the anomaly exists. Originally, and I've said this many times before, Scotland was cold and needy, but it's in danger of being bold and greedy. It gets 23% extra on all of its health spending. It gets 25% extra on all of its education. If they want to be independent, which they are moving towards, no, they want their cake and their halfpenny.
No, only one person in six voted for independence
to the Parliament, which gives them the cash. But it does.
Teresa's accusing the Scots of being bold and greedy.
Yes. I mean, she's very selective in her memory. She seems to forget about the North Sea oil cash that's poured in and kept the Thatcher government afloat for 18 years. She now decides she doesn't want to talk about that. She just
rather an old nationalist slogan, is that not, Irene?
But it's absolutely true. It's not an issue that it's not a point of view that I would take, but it is a fact. It's also a fact that during these years, 40% taxes were paid back to people getting mortgages in England that just didn't occur in Scotland because we had so many local government houses, and these things all even themselves out. There will be different
I would assume that Teresa would
needs.
also apply the same condition to Wales and basically reduce the amount of money or perhaps eliminate the subsidy that Scotland and Wales get, in which case she's done two things. Number one, effectively she's taken the nationalist and separatist line and completely fragmented the UK, and secondly she seems to have completely changed what I understood to be the Tory policy, which is opposition to devolution. Now she's taken on the Liberal Democrat proposals for England, but at the same time as taking the SNP and Plaid Cymru nationalist policies for Wales and Scotland.
I don't mind if the Liberals support the idea of a referendum for England. I think it's an excellent proposal, and I'm delighted to know that the Liberals support the Conservative view, which I am expressing.
Excuse me,
I am expressing.
Where is it in your manifesto?
Let me finish my sentence. Let me finish my sentence. Which I am expressing, which I believe to be a growing feeling within the Conservative Party in Parliament. Something over 30 of our backbenchers already do support it, and I think that our front bench is coming round to it. Our front bench has always supported the policy of the Union. But we never wanted this constitutional vandalism in the first place.
So why do you want to destroy the Barnett formula? Why do you want to destroy the Barnett formula then?
The fact that these parliaments are now in existing will inevitably change the attitude of English MPs to the subsidies which go to Scotland. The Scottish per capita income is now neck and neck with England, and yet they get a subsidy of £7 billion a year, which of course is very nice for the Scots, but is no longer justifiable. The Labour Party will not remove that subsidy because it helps to buy the Labour vote. But we could.
Why didn't you remove it over 18 years? Well, the power for 18 years.
The Conservative Party, when we were all one United Kingdom, kept these anomalies going because they wished to keep the
anomaly like forcing the poll tax together.
We also had a great many Scots who occupied senior executive positions within the Conservative government, and there was no kind of animosity.
We are going to leave it there. It's a fascinating debate, and I'm sure it's going to run and run, but sadly we're going to have to leave it there. Well, we often talk of hearing fireworks in the Commons chamber this afternoon. That was quite literally true. The veteran Conservative MP, Sir Teddy Taylor, took a break from talking about the evils of the European Union to introduce his own bill, which would ban the sale of fireworks to the general public. They're a nuisance, he said.
My own view is there's not just a problem, but a nightmare with fireworks. Those of us who have elderly relatives or young children, or who've got domestic pets, will know that for a period of months, round about the time of Guy Fawkes night, genuine alarm and distress is caused by fireworks exploding at all times of day or night, and sometimes in the early hours of the morning. I reside in the centre of Southend, and I also have a flat in London. And certainly on the basis of the phone calls I get from distressed constituents, the letters I receive, and the representations I get in conversation, I gain the impression the public are fed up to the teeth with the problem, and they want something to be done, and look to Parliament to take the appropriate action. Now, of course, apart from the inconvenience, there's also a safety consideration. I think we all know that for any sports there always are problems and dangers, but I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that in 1997 there were actually 908 reported firework accidents, of which about half involved hospital treatment or other medical treatment.
Where I part company with my honourable friend, Madam Speaker, and what disappoints me so much about his response is that he reaches for the ban and the licensing regime as his solution to the problem. This is classic old socialism. I mean, I'd be surprised if new modern Labour members opposite were attracted to this solution, because it fits very much with the old style patronising socialism of which we thought that we'd seen the back. But here is my honourable friend. Here's my honourable friend coming forward with a measure which effectively patronises the public.
Well, Sir Teddy Taylor's been called many things in his 30 years in Westminster, but never a socialist. Much of the worst important carried out in the Commons, of course, takes place on the committee corridor. This morning, one committee demanded to know how much of the war against Serbia is costing. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Alan Milburn, was the man in the hot seat.
The major costs are humanitarian aid on the one side and the cost of military operations on the other. As far as humanitarian aid is concerned, the government has announced to date £40 million. That has been in 3 tranches. An initial tranche of £10 million. We matched that at Easter with a further tranche of £10 million. And then finally, during the Prime Minister's recent visit to Macedonia, we doubled the level of humanitarian aid from the UK to £40 million. As far as the cost of military operations is concerned, the latest estimate that I have from the Secretary of State for Defence, George Robertson, is that the additional costs of military operations are now £37 million. That is to the end of April, but it does exclude the cost of replacing munitions that have been used during operations.
Who is expected to pay for the rebuilding of the Chinese embassy?
I don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid.
Your estimates, which you gave us for the war costs, work out, I think, at about £1 million a day. So that's the George Robertson figures, about £1 million a day. The figures that I've seen for the overall war costs, Lehman Brothers have done a study which suggests that it's running at a very minimum about $3 billion a month. I mean, what it works out that the UK costs, the UK direct defence costs, are currently only about 1% of the total NATO outlay, which are themselves very conservative because they don't include ground troops, rehabilitation of Kosovo and all the rest of it. I mean, would you not agree that there is a potentially very large increment once we are asked to pay our 5 or 10% of the war bill?
I read in the newspapers, day in, day out, of all sorts of weird and wonderful figures and speculative costs about the UK's effort, whether it be humanitarian aid, whether it be the costs of absorbing refugees in this country, or indeed the costs of military operations. But the figures that I read are just that. They are speculative figures and no more than that. And frankly, they are pretty wide of the mark.
Alan Milburn. On now to the House of Lords debate. It was packed this afternoon as their lordships tried to decide whether or not to save 92 hereditaries after the rest of them are forcibly retired. The so-called Wetherell Amendment would mean the lucky few could stay on until a fully reformed second chamber comes into being, whenever that is.
I commend Amendment 31 to the House. We hope that it may provide a means by which the bill, which the government assures us is itself a stage towards a wider reform of your Lordship's House, may be amended in such a way that it commands wider support amongst your Lordships and in the country, and thus provides a better first stage of a promised reform.
The notion that the government would even contemplate the Wetherell Amendment becoming a permanent settlement, as distinct from a short-term compromise, is fanciful. Let me make it absolutely plain. Stage 2 reform will take place, and when it does, the hereditary peers who will remain, if the Wetherell Amendment passes, will cease to be members of this House. Then, and only then, will the government have delivered 100% on its manifesto commitment.
We do not like the amendment in principle because it maintains a specifically hereditary presence in the House, and we do not like the amendment in detail either.
I happen not to be greatly enamoured with the Wetherell Amendment, simply because I'm not enamoured with the bill. The bill, I think, is a perfectly horrible bill. Its whole purpose is to do one simple thing, which is to get rid of all hereditary peers. In another context, one might call that hereditary cleansing. In other words, get rid of everyone, irrespective of what they are. And I don't take to that too much.
We welcome this amendment as making a bad bill better. We welcome it for avoiding, for the time being, the nightmare of a wholly appointed House. We welcome it as keeping in the House a few of those who we all know have given and can continue to give irreplaceable service.
My Lord, as far as I'm concerned, it is an amendment which makes a good bill a bit worse. The reason I say that is because it does seem to me that it eats into the general principle, which was set out very clearly in our manifesto, that we were committed to the abolition of the hereditary peerage's right to sit and vote in your Lordship's House. My Lord, this amendment is not a matter of principle, however much people try and wrap it up. It is a matter of convenience. And it is therefore, I think, quite important that the House recognizes it for what it is. It is a compromise. And my Lord, the essence of a compromise is that everybody goes away equally dissatisfied with the result that's on the table.
My Lords, there have voted contents 351, not contents 32. So the contents have it.
And that was one of the biggest majorities in the House of Lords this century in favour of sparing 92 hereditaries from the chop. More now from the morning papers with Michael Brown of The Independent. Michael.
Well, Garth, on that Lord's debate, I think Quentin Letts, the political sketch writer for the Daily Telegraph, sums it up best of all. It was rubber rings time in the House of Lords with a glug, glug, glug. The once mighty liner is going down fast. Yesterday, the purser announced that he will be presenting life jackets to 10% of the hereditary peers. So I think that sums up better than the speeches what was going on there.
Indeed.
Very interesting story by Colin Brown and Andrew Grice in The Independent. Blair cools on PR after coalition chaos. Now, very interesting. Tony Blair, it was always said, was supposed to be on Ashdown's side in the long run in favour of PR. But we have a story here that 4 days after Donald Dewar and Alan Michael have failed to put together coalition governments in Scotland and Wales, that maybe Tony Blair has decided that after all it's not a good thing. And I think that what this story shows is that people like John Prescott, Jack Straw and Margaret Beckett, who are implacably opposed to PR, are now very much in the ascendant inside the government, and I think that Blair is now much more on their side, if one believes what is in The Independent.
Is this the first signs of Blair not getting his own way?
No, I don't agree that it's not his sign of getting his own way. What it is, Garth, is that Tony Blair has decided, having seen for himself how difficult it is to put together a government in Scotland and in Wales, that he wouldn't ever want to go through that. So he might as well stick by the first past the post. I think he's actually going back, if this story is true, which I'm sure it is because it's in The Independent, that he genuinely is now much more fearful and agnostic towards PR than he was, at least as far as Paddy Ashdown always assumed he was.
Yes, indeed.
I think that he's changed his stance there.
Now, what do we have here?
Amusing story here in The Guardian. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has suffered at the hands of the voters. His popularity rating has dropped by 17 points in the past year, and I don't think that reflects at all badly on him, to be honest. He's just simply been out of the frame recently. He's been up in Scotland, hidden from view. The economy is on track, and I think what is much more significant and the interesting story
seem to be getting.
Well, We've got Robin Cook here, -5 points last year, +5 points this year. Foreign Secretary involved in the Balkans War. No available figures for George Robertson, the Defence Secretary, +25 this year. He's every day in front of the cameras.
Mo Molan doing brilliantly.
Mo Molan, St Mo, of course, doing brilliantly.
And the final story?
Very, very important news story here for listeners to Radio 4's Yesterday in Parliament. Apparently 100 MPs have managed to persuade the BBC to put the Yesterday in Parliament programme on Radio 4 back on FM and within the Today programme. So that's a victory for Today in Parliament.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Well, that's all for tonight. Steve Richards will be here tomorrow as Tony Blair steps up to the dispatch box for this week's Prime Minister's Question Time. In the Lord Shirley Williams questions the government's handling of the war in Kosovo, and in the Commons, the former Cabinet Minister David Clark calls for the regulation of body piercing. So, something for everyone there. I'll be back next week, but until then, good night.
A very good evening to you and welcome.